Give yourselves a round of applause. You made it to the end. It's always been my dream to talk at a RailsConf, and I'm in. It's the last slot, the last day. I thought there'd be like 10 people here, and you guys are here, and that's very heartening. And I assume you're all here because you want to learn RSpec, or maybe you don't even know what RSpec is, and that's why you're still here. But, has anyone here had any experience with RSpec at all so far? So you've had some. All right, well, who's not had the experience then? It's going to be a little bit more tailored to you guys. I just want to give kind of an overall tour, but before we do that, I'll say who I am. I'm John Larkowski. Everyone calls me Lark. I used to work for Rails consultancy called HashRocket since like 07, so I've been doing RSpec for a while. I feel like I'm just getting the hang of it finally, so I'm qualified to talk about it. But yeah, testing is a long journey, and so I'm at a startup now, moving to San Francisco as soon as I fly home after this talk. But yeah, I've done the RSpec thing, I've done the TDD thing, and I'm here just to give you guys a taste of what it looks like and see if you like it. So, 30-minute tour, and maybe I'll go even faster because it seems we're running a little bit late. Maybe you just want to catch your flights or get out of here or whatever you want to do. But so the goal is just a quick tour. We're going to give you a feel for it. For those of you who already know RSpec, it might be a little bit of a review, but I'm going to give you a little bit of flavor and show you some of the ways that I do RSpec. There'll be at least one example where I kind of show it my way. You can debate that. So overall structure, we're going to talk about how they do expectations, talk about built-in RSpec mocks, mocking and stubbing and doubles and all that. And then I'm just going to give you an example of a model, view, controller, router, helper, and request spec in Rails to show you how RSpec works in Rails. Now, you guys did various versions of these in test unit already, pretty much. Did you do like Capybara or WebRat in test unit? Like what? You guys have been here all week, right? You've been in the beginner track all week, so you've pretty much covered the analogous versions of all this in test unit, right? Is that fair to say? As far as you know? Does anybody know?
Monkey and Sorry was in Mocha.
Oh, you did that with Mocha? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, it's same stuff. In fact, you can actually plug in different mocking frameworks into RSpec. I'm just trying to get a taste for what you guys have done this week, but I'll just go from the basics. But before we even bother doing it, why RSpec at all? You've already learned test unit. Rails makes use of test units. Mini-test is what's coming in Rails 4, I believe. Why would you want to do RSpec at all? Why would you want to take the time to learn yet another framework on top of all 10 or 20 that you're learning just to run one single Rails app, right? Am I right? Is that the temperature of the room? So the reason I love RSpec, and I was a .NET guy back in the day, and so I'd done some of it in other realms. But when I came to Rails and I came to RSpec, it was just the expressiveness of RSpec is what got me. The way it reads, you don't have to name your method names like test underscore this underscore thing in underscore this underscore condition. You can just write strings to describe your test. And the expressiveness of the Ruby, the Ruby that you write with RSpec reads kind of like English. And depending on which camp you're in, you either love that or that just infuriates you. So the goal of this talk is just to show it to you, and if you love it, do it. And if you don't love it, you'll be happier in test unit or mini test or whatever else the kids are using these days. So let's take a look at one. Hopefully this scales. And I can zoom the window properly. So most of you have seen this. This is the simplest RSpec example I could come up with. So what you got here is you're describing a calculator class, and then you're describing its add method. And who here has seen at least this much RSpec so far? Okay, so I won't spend too much time on it. You know that you're describing an instance method here, and you know that you're just making the should expectation. You're saying a new calculator, if I call add on it and I give it 1 and 2, it should equal 3. So that reads kind of like Ruby, and that's a simple example. That much you know, so that's the little bit of flavor that I give you. Now here's more the way that I read RSpec, and this is a little controversial because it's kind of up and down and all over the place, but I wrote this code last night, and it doesn't actually run against any real implementation, so don't copy this down and necessarily expect it to work, but it's going to illustrate a couple points. So let's say we have a blog post, and we're going to describe its remove method. So you've got some blog website, and you want to remove a post, and I'm going to go kind of up and down on this, but I'll try not to go too fast. So a blog post can be either published or unpublished. So when the blog post is unpublished, it's going to work a certain way, and when it's published, it brings it to the top. It's going to work another way. So those are my two contexts. That's one of the main differences with RSpec and other frameworks. Now, should it has context, and I think Minitest has context too. The Minitest spec, it all works this way. But again, just trying to give you a flavor for the style and the way that I do RSpec. So right here we have a let. So this is the blog post that we're working with. This is where you kind of say, what are the players of my test? And we're going to be dealing with a blog post. So I say let, here's some blog post. And what happens behind the scenes here is in a way, you're declaring a method in here called blog post, and that method's value, the return value is memoized, so it's only called once. It's not really a performance issue. So when we refer to blog post later down in our examples down below, it's going to run this once, and then it's going to keep a hold of its value. Yeah, let me read through it the way that RSpec will actually read through it. So RSpec is going to read this whole file, and then it's going to jump right to the first it. And these its are called examples. So we're in the case here of, we have an unpublished blog post, and we're trying to destroy it. And we're calling the remove method here. So here's an example of an expectation in RSpec. You say that the blog post should receive destroy. And that's, you guys talked about mocking and all that before. So let's read through how it actually works. So it's this blog post, and it's like, well, what's blog post? And then RSpec goes up here and says, oh, there's a let blog post. So I'm going to set up my blog post, I'm going to instantiate it, and I'm going to set its published at. And then it's like, it comes to published at, and it's like, what is published at? Well, that's another let that's only for this context. So I'm defining an unpublished blog post here as just the published at date is nil. So again, there's a little bit of hopping around here, but the reason I like the hopping around is that you can say, you can express your context in English here in a nice little string, and then you're only stating the differences in your example. You're saying, what does it mean in English to be unpublished, and what does it mean in Ruby to be unpublished? So in Ruby, it just means published at is nil. So that's why I like that these two lines I keep coupled very tightly. So tracing through that, we say blog post, and it makes the new blog post, and then goes and looks at published at, and it finds what published at is. So you have a blog post whose published at is set to nil. Notice there's no mass assignment problems here. I don't know if you guys talked about security at all, but we set that directly. And then we just say it should receive destroy. We're just going to call the regular Rails destroy method. In the implementation somewhere, when you call remove on an unpublished blog post, it's going to receive destroy. So there's an example of how I might actually write a real RSpec test. And it reads totally different than test unit. It's kind of all over the place and a little bit more Englishy, and if you like the style, then go for it. I happen to love it, but it takes a little while to kind of twist your head around to it. And then just to repeat to drive it home, we'll go through the other examples. So this is the other context. When you have a published blog post and you go to remove it, it should raise some kind of error, right? You don't want to remove a blog post that's live on your site necessarily, or you at least want to be warned about it. You want to maybe say publish, force it or something like that. So again, I say it in English when it's published. And then what does it mean to be published? In Ruby, I say let published at time now. And here's an example of expect. Here's another example. I hope you can all read that even though it wraps. But you either love how this reads, and you're like, wow, that's really slick and elegant, and it's almost like English. You're like, this should be programming. Why is it trying to make it look like a sentence with some crazy punctuation? So that's kind of the goal of my talk. Say, if this is your thing, then RSpec is the place for you. So you say expect, and then this is a Ruby block. So you're saying expect this block of code. If I'm calling remove on a blog post, who is published, I'm going to expect that to raise an error, and then this is just some error class that you make up. And again, how that works is it says blog post, what's blog post? It goes up here, it evaluates this, and then it says what's published at, and then it goes back to that context and says here's published at time.now. And that was the long-winded explanation of how I do RSpec. So now we'll go back to put a review here. You got your describe blocks, you got your example blocks, you got your context blocks, and inside there you put your expectations. And I'm not going to go as in-depth into describing this. I just want to give you a flavor for what's available in RSpec. I want to give you like the smorgasbord of everything you could do with RSpec, so you've seen it and you know where to go further if you're interested. So you got should and should not. Oops, clicking goes forward. Should and should not. You got should equal, should include, like for arrays. You got, we just saw this in the last slide, expect, well, we saw a similar version of this construct. You expect some block of code to change some value. Again, in the big old squigglies there, those are just little bits of Ruby code to evaluate. And then you have these predicate matches. You can say something should, like an array should be empty, or a hash should have some key, or you can even arbitrarily say some class dot should be awesome. And the reason that that works is if you had a method on your class called awesome question mark, it's automatically figured out. RSpec uses method missing to figure out just arbitrarily it should be awesome. As long as it's any question mark method on your class, you can just say be whatever. So let's just take a look at some of those. Again, this is just a sampling of the different things you can do. This is equal. This is like a mathematical comparison. This is a regular expression comparison. This is making an assertion on what type of class something is. This is whether something is truthy or falsy or not. And then these you've seen already, just expecting something to change. This is the ultimate one. Like you either dig that, or you think that that's way too much chaining. But there's an example of that. And then the one I was just talking about, actual should be law. So if you had actual dot awesome there, question mark, then you can say actual should be awesome. So that's what expectations look like, and now we can drive into mocking and stubbing. And you covered this a little bit. You stub out the things that code that you can't control, and you mock the code that you can control, and you're just really trying to shim everything out, so you're only testing the one bit of code that you really care about. And you can do that in RSpec. They call them doubles. Now doubles can be mocks or stubs, and you can muddy the language all you want, but it comes down to whether you're just stubbing out some value, or you're saying, oh, I'm expecting some particular object will receive some message when I run this test. So I'll just show you some more code here. So to make a double, which could be a mock or a stub, they just call it a test double. It's just a stand-in. So you just say, in this case, they have a book, and they're just saying, hey, it's a book. Yeah, go ahead.
So it's got nothing to do with a double numeric type then?
No, it's not a double numeric type, although it could be anything, actually. So the point of a double, it's a stand-in. It has no particular type. It's a stand-in for a book. You don't even care. It's the whole Ruby duck typing thing. It's like, I don't care what a book is. I just care that a book is some object that responds to the title method. That's all this is saying. It's saying if you refer to the book instance, then you got something that will return a title. If I call book that title, it's going to return the RSpec book. Oh, and I should mention on all of these examples, I just took them from the RSpec RDoc documentation. So if you go and read the docs, you're going to see these same examples in there. It was just the easiest thing to use, and it was going to make you familiar with what's already out there for documentation. So that's all a double is. You said you covered Mocha, so similar stuff here, and you can plug in other mocking frameworks if you want. Your mileage may vary. So here's an example of doing should receive. So we make this is a zip code validator, where when you make a new zip code instance, you're passing the validation instance into it, which is a little bit contrived, but it proves what we're trying to do here, which is just use should receive. So you've got some validator, and again, it's not the actual validator, it's just a stand-in. It's some validator. It's something that supports the validation protocol, which in this case, it's just saying it should receive validate with the zip code that you pass in. So here we are making a new zip code. Here's the zip code we're passing in. We're telling it which validator instance to use. And then when we call zip code valid, we know that somewhere in the implementation of validator, it should receive the validate method. And that's all there is to it. I just, again, want to give you a taste of what that looks like, how the flow looks, how the style looks. So those are the basics, and I'm just going to give you a sample of what each kind of RSpec Rails test would look like. We'll start with the models. They're my favorite because they're usually easy and fun, and depending on what you call a unit test or whether you think you're allowed to touch your database or not, they can be easy or difficult, or slow or fast. But I find that they're never super slow for me. Got a little bit of a wrapping issue here. I'll try to zoom out. So I'm not going to go into this too deep. Again, just giving you a taste of the style. So there's some articles class. It's got a recent scope on it. This will probably be an active record or an ARL scope. It just says, give me my recent articles, ones that are less than a week ago. So here you actually say that in English, and then you're going to make an example when you're actually, in this case, it's not a true unit test because it's right into the database. It's actually creating an article who was published just shy of a week ago. And then you're saying that when I call article.recent, that it should equal just that one article that I created in the database. So you keep a reference here to the article that you're creating, and And then you're just making sure that it's in the array that comes back. And then they do it for the other cases too. They do the edge case, which is always important in testing. I always test like what happens when it's exactly 1 week ago. So they're doing it here, and then they're doing one where it's just a little bit, just 1 second more than a week ago. And they're just saying, here's the predicate match right here. So it's saying article recent should be empty. And what that's actually saying is article recent will return an array. Arrays have the empty question mark method on them. So in RSpec, you just say should be empty. That's model spec. For view specs, I do this when every tag counts. There's some debate about whether you should test your views or not because they're kind of brittle or you might be too specific to one particular wording, and then what happens when you internationalize your app and you can no longer depend on certain words being in certain places. But there are times when view specs are really important, when you definitely positively must have something in your view. So here's an example of the view spec. So we're describing some show page here for some event application perhaps, and we want to make sure that the location of the event is displayed somewhere on the page. So what we do here is the assign call actually sets the instance variable that's used by the view template. And you're actually saying event is just some, I don't want to get into stub models. A stub model is just a stand-in for the actual active record model. It's a little bit easier to work with though. So they just say, I'm saying the @event instance variable here is some event whose location is set to Chicago. And then you don't have to deal with actually writing the event to the database, which would make your view test even slower. So you render the view, and then rendered is just an accessor to the actual HTML that comes back. And then you say rendered should contain Chicago. And that's about as hard as they are. Like all you have to do in view test is set up your instance variables or set up what your helpers will return, and then just call render, and then just assert what's there. One example for me that just came up, we have an iPhone version of our web app. And when you make iPhone versions, you have to set the meta viewport tag to size it appropriately. You have to say, look, make this exactly as wide as my iPhone and make it so that they can't scale it or pinch it. It needs to look like a regular app. And for some reason in all of our massaging of our code, we lost that tag. We lost the meta viewport tag. And so our iPhone app went like this and it went down to like this. So it was like a quarter of the page. And when I fixed that, I'm like, I don't ever want that to happen again. So I wrote a view test that renders our mobile layout of our mobile homepage, and then it just asserts, is there a meta tag whose name is viewport that has these properties that makes it look good on the iPhone app, and then I never have to worry about it again. So that's a case where you really want to make sure that some tag is present, because otherwise your mobile experience is totally scrunched up. Quick example of the controller spec. I don't write that many controller specs because I write a lot of integration tests using Capybara, and that often exercises your controllers as a side effect. And again, people debate this, but when you do test controller specs, you're often testing what is the controller finding, what kind of resources is it finding, what instance variables is the controller assigning, and you also are testing authentication or authorization, like are you even allowed to see this resource, are you logged in, or do you have the rights to edit this resource. So here's a simple example of the controller spec. We are doing the index page, so this would be the list of all widgets, and we're going to do a get on the index page in this app. And all they're doing here is doing a stand-in model for a widget, and they're saying that when all is said and done, I'm going to call widget.all, and I'm going to assign it to the instance variable @widgets. So what they're doing here is they're actually putting a stub in place. So somewhere in your implementation, you're going to call widget.all to return all widgets from active record. And they're saying, all right, we're not actually going to call active record here. We're just going to say, when the code does call active record, we're going to return an array of one item that just has our one little widget that's just a stand-in stub model. And then at the end, we're going to make sure this assigns call is saying, well, which instance variables did my controller actually set? So it's saying I set the @widgets controller instance variable ought to be equal to this widget array that I've set up before. So I still remember the first time I saw this kind of testing, and it kind of twisted my brain around, but you just got to stare at it until you get it. You're making sure that has my controller procured the right resources, has it called the right things from active record, and has it assigned it to the proper instance variables so that my view can take care of it. Another kind of spec you might see is a routing spec. This just makes sure that your routes go to the right controller actions in Rails. And this one pretty much speaks for itself. In this case, we're going to look at a user profile for profiles J. Smith. And we want to make sure that that's a show page, right? So we're going to look at profile show for the proper username. So when you call a get on this route, you're expecting Rails to go to the profile controller, the show action, and that the username variable that you get from the route is equal to JSmith. And this is a lot of hashes and dots and shoulds and route twos, but I like the way it reads and you do. And you can also check the converse, like sometimes you don't want people to be able to enumerate all of your user profiles, so you say that should not be routable. Yeah, please.
So how do you test like redirect? Do you test it in the routing specs or do you test it in the controller specs?
Yeah, you can do a should redirect for sure in the controller specs. I don't do that many routing specs, but it would seem that you could. I mean, we'll do that later. Maybe.
What would be the best place to put it?
Something like a redirect that would be for authorization to make sure like you should be kicked out of this page if you don't belong there, if you're not logged in, or if you're not authorized. I would probably test that in the controller level. Or even up higher. I might have one simple test at like the integration test level just to prove that I tried to go here and I actually went there, like, you know, with everything included, you know, through the browser. That's probably how I would do it. But that can get expensive, so you were saying that testing pyramid, you would want to go lower on the pyramid and probably do controller tests for that. Yeah?
Can you specify the host name in routing?
You probably can. Again, I don't write that many of these because they don't come out in the wash for me. They do when you're worried about, when you have routes that are very similar to each other and you want to make sure that I don't know how much you guys have gotten into route matching, but that stuff can get pretty complex and you want to make sure that the right one matches and you go to the right controller action. So that's where I've seen them come in handy, but I've not had to deal with the host name issue before.
So if I'm using integrate views declaration in my RSpec or actually my controller spec, and I can of course test my views and my tags there. My question is, what is the advantage of a view spec as opposed to just doing integrate views test?
So what you're saying, make sure I got this right. You're saying you can do integrate views in the controller spec and you can inspect your views right in the controller, so why write a separate view test?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that comes down to a philosophy issue. If you want to muddle your controller logic against asserting something specific happens in the view, people do it. I mean, that's why it's in there, but I don't often do it that way. I don't often write either controller or view specs. I know I'm being a terrible teacher telling you not to write certain kinds of tests, but at the end I can tell you exactly how I do test. But yeah, I think it would boil down to your particular context, and if that was the easiest way to do something, or the way that, you know, read the best communicated what you were testing to the next developer, then I would go ahead and do that. I mean, a lot of people just don't write view tests, so in your case, it might make a lot of sense if you really cared about something in the view or inspecting something in the view to prove something in the controller were true, then I would definitely do that.
One reason that I can think of where I think a controller spec would integrate this may actually be a helpful thing is that if I'm testing views specific, let's say to my how my app is going to look like on iPhone. Okay, so I have specific CSSs and whatnot or layouts, right? So I want to just make sure that this is how it's going to behave. I don't know if I can do the equivalent in a view spec. Like just say if my whatever my user agent is going to be iPhone, I don't know if I can do that in a view spec.
That's a good point, and I'll summarize it quick, and then we'll keep moving. But what he's saying is, you wanted to make sure that his controller was. There's a lot of different things you can do. Either you look at the host name, or you look at the route to say, am I going to my mobile version of my site at all? Or you can even look at the user agent, and you're doing this in your controller layer, or in some cases in your middleware, and you want to make sure that your controller brought you to the mobile app. And you can do that by asserting for specific content in your page, and that a controller test might be a good place for that. These are good questions. I would love to talk more about them, but I'll get through the regular part of this so that some people who want to escape can escape. Here's an example of a Rails helper test. You do this when you want to test your view helpers in isolation. And the things to note about this one are that RSpec provides the helper method, and that gives you access to, in this case, you're talking about events helper, it knows that, so when you refer to helper, it knows to go and talk to the events helper module, and you can actually call that method, so you get access to your helpers. And then this is just an example of a regular should equal, this is a regular expression matcher, so it's saying, hey, I made this event called RubyKaigi, and if I'm drawing a link, somewhere in that link ought to be something that mentions the name and the date. do an example of a request spec. Now, these are my favorite specs lately. These are the integration level ones. These are driving the browser. You're either driving Selenium or maybe you're driving rack test if you don't need to actually see it. You can actually watch these things fly by in Firefox, and you can watch the buttons be clicked, and you can watch the text fields be filled in, often using Capybara or WebRap. And here's an example of how you do it. A lot of people do this in Cucumber. You guys might have done this in Cucumber, but done a lot of Cucumber lately. This is the way that I'm doing it. And here's an example of how you drive the browser directly from RSpec. So in this case, we're just going to hit the home page and then make sure that the user's username is displayed somewhere on that page when we're all done. I don't know if you guys talked about factories or not. If you didn't, just consider this like an active record create. So we're setting up our initial state here. We're kind of cheating by just putting something directly in the database. If you want it to be truly black box, you might actually have JDO go and sign up in your app. But that can get kind of slow, having to sign up every test user. So we have a JDO with a password in our database. We visit the /login route, and then we fill in a text field called username. And again, this makes use of the HTML label tag. I'm a big fan of the label tag. So it looks for the field whose label, associated label tag, is called username. Fills in that text field with JDO. Does the same thing here for password, and then it finds the button on the page whose label is login and clicks it. And then when we're all done, it does pages, access to all the pages HTML. Yeah?
Would you recommend using environmental variables to fill in sensitive information?
Well, for these, this is a total dummy password.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks. Yeah.
There might be a case, I do recommend that in general, yes. So I recommend having just dummy developer stand-in passwords for things that, like, if you have Amazon Web Services or stuff like that, you can actually fake a lot of that stuff out. So you look at the page, you say should have, this is short for have CSS selector. So this is an actual CSS. This is some tag who has a class of header, and then underneath that is some tag who has a class of username, and then I'm expecting to see the text JDO. And it's just that easy, but it's not really that easy. I find integration testing, especially when you have a lot of client-side logic, to be very difficult. You run into a lot of timing issues and such, but this is just what you have to do. That's the kind of the state we're in. So that was a request spec. And a 30-second review of what I showed you. Again, I just wanted to give you a tour, let you see some RSpec in the wild, and kind of all of its different forms that you use it. So basic structure, expectations, mocking and stubbing, how you use it in Rails. And for more on RSpec, I definitely recommend the RSpec book. And I have, for people who really want it bad, you guys want to actually have a conversation with me. I got 3 of these, so I'll give you these cards, and then if you talk, email Zach Dennis, he can get you a copy of the RSpec book. He said he'll get you signed copies. So run on up here and tell me why you deserve it. And beyond that, the relish docs are great. RSpec is tested in Cucumber, and there's this great website called relishapp.com that generates user-readable documentation from Cucumber. So there's a lot of RSpec documents that are very easy to read there. You can also just read the RDoc. The RDoc is pretty good for RSpec. I have a different talk that I did called Pure RSpec that was more like tips and tricks that I've gotten over the years. Most of it still applies. I think a couple of things have changed, but the majority of the talk should still be good. So if you Google Pure RSpec Ruby Nation, you'll probably get to my GitHub, but from there you can get to the actual presentation that you can arrow through. Or you can hit me at L4RK. Feel free to hit me up for some tips for getting started with RSpec. My company, carezone.com, we help people take care of people in caregiving situations. We are hiring like everybody else, so remember, developing is caring. And also sometimes I co-host the Ruby 5 podcast, so that might be where you've heard me before, although I'm a lot less nervous on the podcast. I don't know how much you guys want to hang around. I'm willing to hang around. I got a little bit of a late start, so I may do a couple minutes of questions. Otherwise, I can just stand up here and do questions. So maybe we'll do like 3 questions. You first, and then so yeah, yeah.
Me?
Please.
So what about like RSpec tests for like REST API? Like, how would you recommend setting them up? Where would you set them up at?
For a REST API?
Yeah, like just purely API for like mobile app.
Yeah, I think you end up going to the controller layer or something like that.
I see.
Yeah, so something that just came up for us recently too. And we have some controller layer stuff, but We lean on integration tests a lot more than a lot of people do, but we have ways of running them fast. So we're actually exercising our API through a full stack test, which I know is recommended, but that's what we do.
So for controller testing, how do you verify the JSON payload and stuff like that? Like, what kind of tools do you guys use to verify that?
Again, we are doing integration tests for that, but I would just parse the JSON and look for key values in there that I really cared about. I wouldn't necessarily. You could get really prescriptive and look for every single value. That might be what's up and coming. We're about to do a big rewrite actually to formalize our API, and at that point, I think you're asserting every single key in your JSON to the nth degree. Yeah, this year.
Yes, sorry if this is a little bit personal, but if you were to put a percentage on the amount of time you spend on testing versus actually writing code, what is it for you personally? And then what's your perspective on that?
For the first couple of years, it was a lot. It was a big percent, but I think it's really paid off. Lately, I'll tell you what we do. We often do outside-in testing, so we will have some kind of RSpec request spec that's just driving the browser. We call it the outside-in. I don't know if they told you about outside-in, but we do the big integration test, and then we go into the little RSpec test. So it's been the majority of my time writing integration tests or model tests. And model tests there's a reason they're my favorite. They're easy. It's really easy to set up a model and set up your mocks and stuff and really isolate model methods. Integration tests take longer. But yeah, there's a huge learning curve, especially when you're just getting started with testing. It doesn't matter whether you do RSpec or test unit or mini test. There's a lot of pain, there's a lot of books to read, there's a lot of wisdom to be gained. And I find the real trouble that I've had in the last few years was testing JavaScript in the browser in an integration fashion where timing matters or certain tags in certain places matter or clicking in just the right place matters. And it's like, how do I write a CSS selector to get there? But lately, to answer your question directly, it is a negligible cost. I mean, it's, what is it, 30% to 70% of actual development? And it's not that simple of an equation, though, because if you've ever had a regression, especially in like a backbone app, you're like, when did this come out? So, you know, anytime I've been lax on testing, I've found that I get regressions, and I found that fixing regression bugs ends up taking hours, and if I just written a test, it might have taken 30 minutes to write a test that later, months down the line, took 3 hours to debug. So that's my equation. And then we have one more up here, and then we'll kind of lose Kobe now. Sorry, go ahead.
Does this, is that just the concurrency, like can people, logging in and,
You can test concurrency. Capybara supports that. I don't know how, it's relatively recent, but you just name each session, and then you can have one person log in and send a message, and have another person log in the same test and read that message, or if you have like a messaging web app, something like that.
Follow-up question?
Yeah.
It's a little bit like a JMeter Apache, which also tries to do concurrency on the websites, I suppose. So, but this is more specifically to run the individual sessions and maintain the sessions.
Yeah, it pretends as if it were totally separate browsers. That's how it
I think JMeter, as I understand, is more of the load testing.
Right.
And how much traffic it's like.
Can't believe you guys stayed till the end. Thank you
Yeah.
for listening.